Hey Tara, how's it going today?
Hello, it's so good to see you.
I know it's always great to see you, and I feel like one, we just always see each other on Zoom or a platform like this because so much of our friendship, I think, has been built through like these virtual times. So, how's that pandemic treating you these days?
Um, I have to be careful in how I say this, because I want to be super conscious of the fact that like a lot of people have really, really, really suffered in so many different ways this year. But I feel like, knock on wood, the pandemic has actually been pretty good for me, to be honest. It's really forced me to take time to get off the road, stop traveling, which I've been saying I've wanted to do for years. So this has made me do it. I spent that time writing my book. I've actually like gotten into fitness. I want to say again, but it was so long ago that I was into fitness before. I don't know when the statute of limitations on again runs out. Um, I've started cooking. I've reconnected with people through doing, these virtual things, but socially with people who I don't normally talk to, and on and on and on. And so, yeah, I'm excited that people are starting to get the vaccine now because I know a lot of people are really, really, really needing to start resuming, some sort of normality. But I'm okay hunkering down for another couple months, to be honest. I can get a
Yeah,
lot more
I'm
work
not
done.
mind you. Like I
Yeah,
said, I'm not minding of some of the isolation myself. It's given me time to focus on a lot of projects as well that I've really needed to dedicate myself to. And like I told you off air, I have a 1.5-year-old son, so it's been
right.
nice to spend those small moments with him. Now, one difference I noticed with you right now is you're not in your beautiful backyard, so it must be a little colder in Jersey.
There's a lot of snow in my backyard right now. And it's called the lanai, by the way.
You know what? I had a feeling you called it lanai, but I didn't want to get it wrong because that's such a fancy word to use.
You know, um, I my boyfriend has sort of uh, convinced me, talked me into calling it the lanai because I had some issues when I built it a couple years ago with some neighbors and maybe with the city. And apparently there's a difference between having a deck and another form of like outdoor constructed space when it comes to permits and such. So he kept telling me it's not a deck, it's not a deck, don't call it a deck. So I'm like, cool, it's the live and dream lanai. And I like to I've basically named every single part of my house. I mean, my house has a name, my beer cellar has a name. Actually, my office where I'm sitting right now doesn't have a name yet. But anyway, right. So,
You know, is that something all journalists do? Do you all give names to different rooms in your homes that are outside the ordinary?
it started, I lived in Charlottesville in the 90s. I had my first TV journalism job there. And it's very, landed gentry, fox hunting around there. And people name their homes. Like, you can go on walks and there are signs outside people's houses, like not even mansions, like ordinary houses. And they'll have names. So it just used to be a way that I would entertain myself when I was walking. I would think of names to name my future house, and here I am in a house. So I gave it a name and then got really, 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 really carried away.
You know, I can appreciate that because my wife's grandparents, they had a home they called Thornhill. And when you give a home a name, it just sounds so much more respectable. Like, whoa, it's so much more impressive.
Oh, please. Mine is Alegria. Wait, what is it? I don't even remember now. The Alegria Estate. So you throw an estate on it, and you're like, you've added a couple zeros onto the side.
I absolutely love it. Well, let's take a few steps back because it's so funny. You and I have just connected literally just virtually because we've never met in person.
I
And it's
know.
funny to think about because we probably know so little actually about each other. We both know what each other does, you know, actually right now and at the moment, but we don't know the backstory. So I'm really excited to learn more about you today, not only in a professional level, but as a friend, because I'm really excited to hear how, you know, the Tara Nurin we know today got to be the person she is. So let's dive into this. I'm looking forward to learning a few cool facts about you today.
Would I be the first person, or not at all the first person, to say, well, first there were the dinosaurs, and then Lady Di started wearing Princess Charles clothes? I love that line. It's an airplane reference for those of you
I love it, of course.
who don't know. yeah, so I don't know. Ask away. Where do you want to
Let's
start?
do it. I mean, 10-year-old Tara, when you wanted to grow up, what did you want to be? Did you have these massive dreams of writing about beer for Forbes magazine? Or, if I were to meet you when you were just a little kid, where did you think your life was going? And more importantly, where were you growing up?
So I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland. I was there, until I left for college at age 18. Lived in a couple different houses, but I was lucky in that I, stayed pretty much in the same school system, whatever. And yeah, it was when I was about 10 that I decided to be a journalist. I don't think I knew about Forbes magazine at the time, and I certainly didn't ever consider writing about beer. Let's see, that would have been in the early 80s. So there was like hardly even any beer writing at the time, but I guess a tiny, tiny bit. Michael Jackson obviously was already writing about beer. Can't remember when Fred Eckert started, maybe around then. No, that would have been early. Anyway, whatever. So I read a lot as a kid, and I remember sitting on our back porch reading one day. I don't think we called it a lanai. I think we called it a porch. My parents weren't as fancy as I am. And I was reading this book about just a kid's fiction book about a girl, and she wanted to grow up and be a journalist. And even though I really can't remember my cat's name, I can't remember how to find my bedroom from the kitchen, like I remember having this epiphany thinking, wow, a journalist, that's interesting. And I remember like sitting there and being kind of wowed by the idea, thinking it through, like, well, I bet as a journalist, I would always get to learn things. My learning wouldn't stop. And I would get to learn a lot more than the average person because I'd need to know a lot in order to tell the story to other people. So I'd have to pick and choose my facts. I'd never get bored because I'd always be doing different things. And, telling this story, I've told it 1,000 times and I'm thinking like, I wasn't that smart or prescient as a 10-year-old. Was I really thinking that? Or is this just me like backfilling the story? But my memory tells me that I did have that conversation with myself. But anyway, whether it was really that day or not, I did have those thoughts eventually. And really quickly after I decided to be a journalist, it may even have been that very day, I decided that I want to readjust this a little bit. I decided I wanted to be a TV reporter. That sounded more interesting. I don't remember if I thought it would be more glamorous or not, but maybe more fun.
Did you also read a book about reporting at that same time?
No, but I did have the good fortune. My brother's best friend, his father was a well-known TV news reporter in the Baltimore market. And so I did know somebody who was doing that. And he right away was excited to like always help me out. Like when I had days off in high school, I would go out and like go to a governor's press conference with him, and he would let me like make fake stories with his editor. So that was my behind the scenes kind of learning. I'm blanking on my words right now. That was my behind the scenes experience that I was able to get before I went to college. And then
you were lucky to have that at such a young age. I mean, that book moment when you were reading, do you remember what that was? Was it one of those childhood books we all read, but just had more of an impact on your life?
No, I don't think so. I think it was just some random story about a girl. And you know what? There's one other thing that was in that book that, talk about random. I remember one line that I'm almost positive was in that book that just icked me out so much that I remember it to this day. And it was the main character. Nothing to do with anything, by the way. The main character was describing this like guy she knew, an adult guy she knew, and she said he spooned yogurt into his mouth. And I was like, that guy sounds really lame. Who spoons yogurt into their mouth. But you know, if I want to pretend that there's like some point to me telling this, which there isn't, you know, it speaks to word choice though, right? Like as
That's
writers.
exactly what I was gonna say. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, that is what you do. You spoon yogurt into your mouth, but like the power of one word to sort of paint a description, paint a picture of a character is really powerful. So it like, it's fun for me to like take time to think about the exact right word that I want to use, and as often as possible get away from the dreaded to be. I don't know. Does that come up in your life at all? I mean, you do some writing.
It does. And you know what? I should have named this episode Spooning Yogurt, the Tara Nurin story, because I feel like it has a much better ring to it than what we've already talked about.
I do not, I eat yogurt. I do not spoon yogurt. Thank you. let me get that on the record.
No, but it's so true. The power of a simple word can make a story so much more fascinating. So like when you were reading this as a kid, did you immediately start writing more, or were you just thinking about being a journalist, or when did you actually, you know, take those words to paper or typewriter or computer or whatever medium you chose?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I don't think I really did start writing more. You know, I did the requisite writing assignments as a kid in school, and I was always complimented on being a good writer. So I was getting good feedback on it. I don't remember actually doing more than what was required, to be honest, as far as writing goes, until maybe junior high, and I got very involved in yearbook. I don't think we had newspaper then. I was much more into yearbook throughout school than newspaper. But I was the co-editor of the yearbook senior year. So that had a lot to do with like layout and production and captioning and such. I mean, not full-length writing. And, you know, people sometimes ask me if I journal. You know, that would be like the other expected thing that a teenage girl might do who likes to write. And I have to confess that's a no. I mean, I would always kind of start a journal, especially when I was traveling. My mom really pushed that to, you know, chronicle what I did when I was on trips. But I had trouble being consistent with it. So I have lots of journals that I've started, and I'm sure they're very dramatic, full of very descriptive words, but they never got too far. So yeah, I think that it might have been just more in what I was doing in school, and then a bit extracurricularly, rather than like diving into these awesome things that I know other people do. Boy, I'm not painting a good picture of myself. It's amazing I've gotten as far as I have. All right, anyway, next question.
We're going to get to where you are today, and you don't have any, you know, great journals of like teenage poetry that you want to share with us today?
No. I have like one epic poem that I've written in my life. I was in my 20s. I remember reading it to two very close friends, and I got myself like so worked up before I read it out loud for the first time that I sort of cringe to think about what they might have actually thought of it, and whether they thought that it was like just completely overwrought. But yeah, I should try to find that sometime. I bet that was actually pretty decent. But yeah,
we're gonna have to do a follow-up episode on that one.
I know, right? Where I read it. Yeah, I never really enjoyed writing fiction that much. Oh, I'm getting.
I don't hear that, but you sound okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm echoing all. Where was I? Fiction. Yeah, I never took to writing. I didn't feel like I didn't feel good at it, but over the years I've oh, that's better. Okay, I'm not echoing anymore. I don't oh, so I've spent the past few decades walking around with like the beginnings of fiction books in my head that I also never put to paper, but maybe one day.
That's fascinating. So like you were in high school, you were getting involved with your local friends. You said your friend's dad or somebody who worked at a local paper, a local TV station.
Yeah.
So when the time came for you to apply to colleges and things like that, were you deciding to go for journalism, or what were you declaring as the major you wanted to have when you were going to school? And where did you apply? Where did you end up?
So I got advice from Lou Davis, this gentleman I'm talking about, and some other random people who must have been in the industry, telling me not to major in journalism, not to major in communications, not to major in writing or English. I very consistently heard from these people, major in a subject. That way you have like some knowledge of content. And then you can sort of learn how to be a journalist after that. So that's what I did. I went to Tufts University outside Boston. They had no real journalism program to speak of. I think they had like a couple elective classes. And I majored in international relations and minored in sociology. And for the most part, I think that was good advice. I did then go to grad school for broadcast journalism, where I did then learn to do the journalism and the broadcasting part. Yeah, I get asked about this a lot by people who are younger than me, who are interested in going into school, and I tell them, don't worry about going to J school. But I also think that answer comes from a bit of a position of privilege, because I then was able to go on to graduate school, and not everybody would have that opportunity or be able to afford it, or for whatever reason. So I don't know, not that you're asking me to give advice to all the aspiring journalists who are not watching this.
Well, if they want to leave the craft beer industry, maybe they'll go become a journalist.
That's right. Well, there's another story I've been wanting to write for years, and that is how many people in the craft beer industry we don't realize were journalists before we got into beer. And it's not a ton, but some, like, I think probably the best known example is Steve Hindy, was a journalist. I want to say Garrett was a journalist too, way back in the day, but I might be wrong on that. Do you know?
I remember that Steve was, for sure.
Yeah. Plus a couple notable people here in the Philly, Jersey area. So that's kind of fun. I mean, I think that certain aspects of our personalities and our skill set and our interests translate. We're certainly not in it for the money, any of us, right? And it's a bit of an offbeat creative pursuit. It's a little intrepid, blah, blah, blah. So it's been really fun being able to combine the two.
So I'm sure it's giving you...
What?
Oh, you're turning the table on me right now?
Yeah, what did you want to do when you grew up?
It's funny. When I was in high school, my dad was an accounting major in college, and he ended up being somewhat like a business consultant. And so I figured, if he did the accounting major thing, I might as well try to do the same thing. So I went to college, when they asked you to write down your major, I put accounting as well. I quickly realized that is not what I wanted to do, although I am hosting a panel this week on finance for non-financial people. And I think I fall more into that category than the teacher, the one hosting it rather than the one sharing all the financial knowledge. But I did realize through that I like business, and that kind of shifted me to becoming a marketing major. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do then. I ended up going into the music industry for a while, and I enjoyed that. And quite a few years later, here I am. So I think it's always fun to hear people's backstories. But back to you, Tara. We're going to turn it back to you on that one. We digress. So, you're in college, you're went to grad school. Did you have a mentor who was really encouraging you to go in this direction, to get into, become a reporter?
There was somebody in college who led what was called the experimental college. No, she wasn't the leader. Tufts had something called the experimental college, which was basically like random random academic stuff that you couldn't really major in. So they just threw a couple journalism things in there. Those tended to be more of like the artsy things. And the woman, Susan Eisenlohr, I think was her name, she was a good mentor. She helped me get into 2 internships senior year. And then I proceeded to have Lou Davis throughout my life until he passed away. I don't know, it might be 10 years ago already. But, he was always still somebody I could turn to. for advice. Senior year in college, I had 2 TV internships in Boston. Those were both great opportunities. And so I had people, I don't know, well, yeah, the guy I worked for my second semester, I interned for my second semester, was a good mentor. He was actually the financial reporter for the CBS station in Boston. And I worked directly for him as his, I think, sole intern. And he was fantastic. He had been there a long time. So he was really interested in grooming his interns to go on. The internship I had first semester was, like I said, also at a Boston TV station, but it was more just general, like assignment desk, go pull copy, or, you know, go out with this photographer and do an interview kind of thing, which was awesome. I mean, I was like 20, but there wasn't as much really hand-holding in that one.
So once you were being groomed, was it finance you took a liking to, or what beat did you really enjoy getting involved with? Or were you more so a generalist back then? You know, anything that was interesting to you?
Yeah, I was much more of a generalist. I never expected to get into business reporting, even though once I got to grad school, I did select that as one of my one of my specialty areas. Yeah, back then it was very much more general because let's see, when I left grad school, I moved to the Upper East Side of Manhattan for like 6 months, thinking I would get a job at like New York One or News 12, the Bronx, like right out of grad school. No, that wasn't going to happen. But I was a volunteer at the Pacifica radio station in New York.
Cool.
For that time, and I started out working, interning, whatever you want to call it, for the film critic at first. And God, he was like so out of central casting. He wore all black, like black jeans, black turtleneck. I'm sure he wore a black beret, or at least he does in my mind. He was like haired, like super curmudgeon-y, you know what I mean? And then I went to work for free for the guy who was basically in charge of like all the like Latino coverage, and that was very generalist also, as long as it pertained to that community. So
how are you paying your bills back then?
I don't remember.
I mean, you were living in the city. You were doing a little internships, it sounds like, but you had to have a little revenue coming in. There was no side jobs you took to back in the day?
No, you're right. I did. I was temping. Okay, so I lived in New York twice for 6 months each around that time. So let's see. After, I'm probably screwing up the times. I definitely temped in New York. I had a really awesome temp job working at the headquarters of Estee Lauder / Clinique in Midtown in the Estee Lauder high rise. And did you ever see the movie The Devil Wears Prada or read the book? Awesome movie. So you know the main character, she's the second assistant. And what's her name? The main character just calls them both by the same name. I was the second assistant. But the woman we were working for, she was the VP of technology for Clinique. She was amazing. I don't think she knew my name, but she was really amazing. And I was the second assistant. That was my main temping job. And yeah, that's how I was making some money. I don't think I was paying rent. I was living with a guy I had met when I lived in San Francisco at a post-Dead show. Remember Further Fest? Are you a Deadhead?
Oh, yeah. My sister's a huge Deadhead, so I hear a lot about that.
So Further Fest was what they did, I guess, the year after Jerry died. And yeah, I met a guy out there in San Francisco. He was on tour, and I moved to New York with him. So I didn't need a lot of money. Just enough to
there we go.
buy beer once in a while, I guess.
Now, were you a beer drinker at that time in your life, or what was your, vice of choice?
I'm gonna refer to another movie here. I might have visions of grandeur. The Jenny character in Forrest Gump?
Yeah, of course.
and how she like epitomized. She's such a fascinating character, and she epitomizes like each era. You know, she's like a hippie in the '60s. She gets AIDS and dies. Sorry, spoiler alert in the '80s.
If you haven't seen Forrest Gump by now, go watch it tonight.
That's right. And my drinking habits are like that to some extent. Like, so I started drinking beer as like a toddler because my dad would give me sips. I'm sure I've probably said this on one of our panels or whatever before. My dad was a brand Bud drinker out of the can when I was a kid. And I don't know, like, I think I liked the fact that it was not, that I wasn't supposed to be drinking it. Can't remember actually liking the taste, but like he would give me sips. And so I was familiar with the taste of beer. Drank Beast Light in high school, you know, like we all do. When I wasn't drinking Bartles and James, of course. And I'm so dating myself. Bartles and James are wine coolers, guys. Those are sort of like Zima, but better. So let's see. Oh, so senior year of college, I had a boyfriend who was from New England and so had kind of grown up ish with craft beer. And so, which of course we called microbrew at the time. And so senior year of college, I started drinking like Harpoon and Magic Hat and Saranac and stuff like that we could get in New England. Long Trail. And so I drank that senior year. Then I think I couldn't afford good beer anymore. So for the next few years, I wasn't really drinking good beer like that, except on occasion. I do remember when I lived in New York, I would be excited to like drink a Pete's or drink a Sammy Smith's or drink a Bass. And then when I lived in San Francisco, I would get crazy excited when I could drink a Red Tail from Mendocino. And so there was a little of that, but not so much. And then in the 2000s, when everyone was on like a red wine Pinot kick, I did that. And yeah, whatever, until maybe 10 years ago, whatever was kind of trending, I was ahead of the trend, but I would drink what was trending.
And at that point in time, had you thought that beer would ever intersect with your professional career, or was you still just, yeah?
No way.
Interesting. So where were you working when you were, when you left New York? Did you apply at other places, or where did you ideally want to get that first job on air?
So when I didn't get any jobs in the entry-level TV jobs in New York, because there is no such thing, I got my first TV job in Charlottesville, which I feel so grateful for to this day. So that was TV job number one.
Yeah, I'm 2.5 hours from Charlottesville. It's such a beautiful city. I mean, whenever I plan a quick little getaway, that's the go-to.
It
so
is.
You were lucky.
I was so lucky. Drank wine at that time because Charlottesville's, got a nice little wine scene. Not so little. And then I had 2 TV jobs after that. I went to Memphis. And then I got hired in Philly, which is what brought me to this area. And that was like 03 to 05. And then I left that TV job in 05. And that's when I started freelancing and really starting to write about beer. But I want to go back to something, actually.
I want to go back too. You just flew through like 10 years of your time in TV.
Right.
So what do you want to go back to first?
Well, what I wanted to go back to is when we were talking a minute ago about what kinds of beers I was drinking when, and did I ever think about, making beer a career? Like, no, it absolutely never occurred to me at that point. It never occurred to me until I was in Philly, like 2003, 2005-ish. But one of the most like sentimental and powerful parts of being a beer journalist for me now is applying my current knowledge and current contacts back to my past and filling in lots of gaps that I didn't even know about at the time. And that's pretty vague. So what I mean is, like, one really good example is that, like, Pete Flossberg and I of Pete's Wicked Ale are like really good buddies now. And I loved his beer in the 90s, never thought about like who Pete was, just at a bar drinking his beer. And then like now we text all the time, you know? And then there's one super meaningful story that I talk about in my book, which is that like I'm pretty obsessed with early craft beer history. And when I lived in San Francisco in the 90s, I said, you know, when I could get my hands on a Red Tail, I would get so excited. But I never thought about it beyond like, I love this beer, who makes it? Okay, great, move on. And now, like, I know the entire story of how that beer came to be. It relates to New Albion, the first ground up craft brewery post-Prohibition in America. I got to go and hang out with Don Barkley at the place where it was brewed last year, and like he pulled out like all this documentation about it. We're in this like mothball brewery where he made it, and just that sort of thing. And God, I have chills just thinking about it now. Like, I guess it doesn't really have any meaning outside of me. You know, like, I'm not curing cancer or anything because that happened, but just like how things can come full circle sometimes. And how with the book I get to sort of tell some of those stories that haven't been told about that time period and bring those to light. It's really, really, really gratifying.
So we've already mentioned the book a few times right now, and I know you're writing a book, but for everybody listening right now, what are you writing on, and how long has this project been going on for?
Oh, don't ask. It might be 7 years. I'm afraid to do the math. I'm writing a book. It's almost finished. It's coming out September 21st. It's the history of women in beer. It'll be the first book to chronicle the entire history of women in beer, which starts back in hunter-gatherer days and goes through so many twists and turns and lands us back here in craft brewing in America. And then we look forward a bit. We look internationally at what's happening and sort of look at what's to come. And I love it. I'm really excited about it.
It's interesting to look at the role of women in craft beer today versus 7 years ago. What was your initial motivation to start, first writing the first words on paper with this concept?
Well, I'm wearing my pink boots.
Yeah, I love
it. Sweatshirt on purpose, because for anybody who's watching who isn't familiar with Pink Boots, it's the primary, well, it was the first and still is the primary organization to devote itself to women in the beer industry. And it's expanded now. It includes women in all alcoholic beverage industries, and it is international now, which is fantastic, and it's a nonprofit now. Terry Ferendorf is the founder of this organization, and she's one of my closest, most important mentors. And it was her idea. She told me to write it. And I was like, okay. I was like, yeah.
So obviously you're getting into beer in your life, but were you writing for beer purpose publication at this time, or you were? So kind of step back. When did you first make that dive into writing beer?
So that happened. So, okay, we talked about what kind of journalism I was interested in. I've always been, I mean, this does intersect with business, and I love writing business now. It just wasn't something I had set out to do. I love writing about economic development. It's one of my favorite things to write about. And so when I left TV in 2005 and I decided to stay here in the Philly region and freelance, my biggest client for several years was the Philly Tourism Bureau. And in 2005, Philly, in my opinion, was the top beer city on the East Coast. And so I was doing a lot of research and writing a lot of press releases about, like Yards Brewing was growing at that time. There were a couple other breweries starting to open at that time. Beer bars were starting to open. So like I say, I decided like, oh, right time, right place, right gender. Maybe I should write about beer. So I did. I started writing about beer, and also because it has so much impact on economic growth and development and tourism and collaboration and eco-friendliness and all those things that we love about it. I sensed that it would be like a really positive thing to write about and tell people about. And now I've forgotten your question. Sorry, what was it?
I think we were talking about the history of you and when you got into beer writing. So no, that's fascinating. So were you essentially putting your services out there as a freelancer, or was there a certain publication you put out a lot of content for?
Oh, okay. So right. So I started at that time freelancing, and the more I wrote about beer for the Tourism Bureau, the more I wanted to get into it, and the more beer stories I started to pitch. So we had like 2 alt weeklies in Philly at the time. I started writing about beer for them. And I don't remember exactly how or when I started writing about women in beer. But I did, and that quickly turned into a regular column in Ale Street News. Do you remember Ale Street News?
Yeah, I've heard of Ale Street News.
So Ale Street News at the time was a big deal. And Tony gave me a women in beer column. It was called Athena's Fermentables. And so I wrote about beer from a female perspective and about women in beer for that column. And I just was like really making that my I made beer my specialty and then women in beer my subspecialty. And so I just started pursuing those stories more and more. Then I got very involved in the Pink Boots. I founded Beer for Babes, which was the first consumer education group for women in New Jersey regarding beer. And because until recently there were just so few women in beer, and especially like on the periphery, like working outside the breweries, like female beer journalists and such. I was able to get a lot of assignments and get fairly well known pretty quickly because I was a novelty. I was rare.
Interesting. So your early days writing for Ale Street, were there any certain articles or topics that you found were like just really powerful for you and just encouraged you to go forward more? Because everybody has those pieces that you remember writing that had an impact on not only you, but probably readers as well.
Oh, you always ask such good questions.
Or any general themes. You don't have to be specific on this one.
Well, I don't think this is going to exactly answer your question, but it does speak to some very important and relevant things, especially right now as, the latest in what I hope will be many, many revelations of very bad sexual harassment tolerance in the beer industry. And I'm referring to I'm talking about Boulevard, but for anybody watching, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go Google Boulevard sexual harassment right now and you'll see. So a question that I asked a lot in my interviews with women was, what kind of discrimination do you face? And I always got the same answer. Always got the same answer. My coworkers are fabulous. No one treats me any differently. Sometimes at a beer fest, some idiot will insist on talking to my male 20-year-old assistant. Even once he tells that person that I'm the boss. And sometimes like a contractor will come to the brewery and ask to talk to the owner and not want to talk to me. And sometimes a good old boy distributor will blah, blah, blah. That was it. It wasn't until I'd been reporting, like, and with like really good sources, I thought, reporting on this topic for, I'm going to say like 7 years, that people started to whisper and tell me that actually there was a lot of stuff they were putting up with within the breweries themselves from some really highly regarded men in the industry, like people we all know. I'm not saying that's common, but it happens. And here we are many years after that, and it's still, for the most part, never spoken about above a whisper. And the reason is that there is incredible retaliation. Like, people who report what's happening to them get ignored, and then they get retaliated against, both within their jobs and when they go to apply for other breweries. So I guess to bring that back to your question, that's a topic that always makes me want to push forward more, because we're in huge denial as an industry about that. Even after Me Too came to like so many other industries, like, unfortunately, what's happened at Boulevard is so far from an isolated incident that there's a lot more there to talk about.
I mean, obviously, we're talking craft beer right now, but so why do you think our industry has this problem? I mean, a lot of industries obviously have this problem, but why in particular do you think it has been a problem for a long time in craft beer? But it's a great thing where it's getting conversations like this right now where we're actually talking about it to make improvements.
You're right. It is a problem in probably every industry. Maybe there are some that don't have it. God bless them. I don't know of any. Certain factors that I think would make it more prevalent in beer. It is still very much a male-dominated industry. Women are very much numerically still the exception. So it's women like playing on a field that is controlled by men, where they are surrounded by men. And even the best intentioned men don't necessarily know what they don't know. And I mean, I would say that like about anything, like white people, like when it comes to, race, I don't necessarily know what I don't know. So, and that's like in the best circumstance. So there's a lot of like unintentional blindness to it, or, oh, that's not a big deal, he was just kidding, or, oh, toughen up, stuff like that. And the women who go into brewing are already really tough. Like, that.
For sure.
I know that. There are no wilting violets in beer. If they're complaining about something, it's gotten really bad. So that's one reason. So it's men who are like the gatekeepers. And then also, I think the second biggest factor among many are that there's alcohol, right? I mean, so let's say you're a female salesperson and you're out at bars, doing promos or whatever. You're dealing with drunk people, potentially. You might have had some stuff to drink, so maybe your own judgment isn't like 100%. And that's not to victim blame, but it's a fact. And lines get blurred and people don't remember what was said, and you might say something that you would know better not to say if you were sober, and on and and then like, you might end up crashing somewhere, you might not, because you don't want to drive home, which is awesome, but you might have like a false sense of security that where you're deciding to crash is safe and maybe it's not. So those are just a few of the many, many reasons.
And you mentioned off air that in craft beer, there's so much, friendliness between everybody that it's not uncommon for people to give each other hugs when they haven't seen each other
Right.
for a while. So I imagine that probably also contributes a little to it.
That's such a good point. Yeah, we were talking about that. I was saying, like, if I haven't seen somebody in a long time, and so many of us do this, and it's a professional person I know through beer, like, I'm inclined to go give them a hug. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, should I have done that? And right there, I hear Max, I think, behind you.
Oh, you do hear him. The joys of working from home.
He's like, I want a beer. It's beer time.
He only drinks non-alcoholic, Tara.
Oh, that's good. Give him another year or two. Yeah, so there is so much camaraderie, and that is awesome, right? But I guess that too, it does lower the barriers. Like for instance, I have kind of a crude sense of humor, and so I can put up with like a lot before I get offended. Like if you and I are friends and we're joking around, I'll be like, ha ha ha, and then, not to make you the bad guy in this story, but let's just say then you go one step further and I'm offended now. And here we're just talking about like making jokes, right? But this could happen anywhere. And so it is when you're like in a friendly professional relationship, I think it is easier to not exactly, it's easier probably to cross the line. Because you're not necessarily on your like most reserved, like best behavior, right? That's what you're saying, right? I would agree
No,
with
that
that.
makes sense. Now, looking back to 7 years ago when you first started writing this, do you feel our industry is making strides in the right direction, or how would you compare or talk about the progress we've made over those years?
I don't really think when it comes to harassment and discrimination and sexual violence, we really have. Um, I mean, I guess sort of through the back door ish, we might be in that as the industry professionalizes and some breweries get bigger and have more money and become more corporate, they might, you know, put an HR department in or hire an HR person. But like as we see with Boulevard, those employees say that their HR person was basically protecting the perpetrators. And I know from doing reporting on like race in beer this past year, I've learned that, and this applies to anybody, women, even like white dudes, it's not necessarily enough to just have an HR department. It's important to have like a DEI specialist, as I'm sure some of your guests have talked to you about, um, with you about, in order to make sure that everybody's comfortable in your corporate environment. It's important to have like a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist to really make sure comfort is being fostered. And so if we're in an industry where an HR person is rare, much less an HR department, much less a DEI specialist, we have a long way to go.
Everything you just said is so true and sometimes unfortunate because some breweries these days, you're right, they don't have HR departments. They don't have the person that handles these situations. It's more so you get hired, you work behind the bar, you're the brewer. You don't get training on these aspects. And I think it's so important. I think it's really important to educate and have conversations like this so our industry can become better. And, as a white guy in the craft beer industry that looks like nearly everyone else, it's our goal here in Craft Beer Professionals just to help facilitate these conversations and have those tough topics come to light. Because the more we can talk about them, the more we're learning, or more we're hearing how people feel about other people's experiences. And you might have just signed yourself up to participate in a panel at the spring conference on sexual harassment, because that's something I've already got in my notes, and I think you're so educated on it. I think you'd be an awesome person to hear more about on that.
Thank you. I think that's amazing that you're going to have a panel about that. And I would love to participate or help in any way. I don't want to take the place of somebody who, has been through it themselves. My own experiences, I don't know how I've been so lucky. I think I was pretty blind to a lot of like sexual discrimination in my past. but yeah, if you feel like I could be a positive presence on that, I of course would be happy to.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm really looking forward to your book when it comes out in September. I think anyone who's watching who wants to learn a little history and about women in craft beer, I think it's going to be a fascinating story. And I know you've been working on it for so long, so I can't wait to read it. But, let's look back in your career again, because you have done so much and it's been fascinating learning more today. From your perspective, what's your proudest moment of your time, your professional career, whether you're, on camera or behind the pen?
That's a great question too. Two things come to mind right away, and probably after we hang up, I'm going to be like, I thought of
number three.
Two things come to mind right now. One is this book. Like, I've never done anything this big before. I'm really proud of it. I lay out some, it's not just okay, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. I have the angle is basically women have been the beer brewers throughout time and space, and every time and in every space, the forces of economics, politics, or religion, sometimes it was a combination, have moved men in and kicked women out. So it's definitely not like an I hate men book. I don't hate men. I love men. I love good men anyway. But there's definitely a fascinating feminist angle to it. And the fact that it just keeps happening, things that we hear now are exactly the same with just different words as thousands of years ago. It's crazy. So that, and then something else that I'm proud of is something that did just happen most recently the other day. It can be easy. I don't know if, you ever feel this way, but I write and I post, and it doesn't necessarily feel like there are any actual people out there reading it necessarily, because I might get no feedback, or it just goes out, it's not a two-way conversation, right?
I definitely feel that way sometimes. The
damn
Facebook algorithm, of course.
Yeah, well, right. It's like we're talking in a vacuum, we can't see anybody who's watching right now. There could be no one. There could be 5,000 people. Hi. Anyway, sorry. So, once in a while, well, sometimes I will get great feedback on this story meant so much to me. I learned so much from this story. And the times when that is most meaningful to me are when it is a woman who has been through some sort of negative experience in the industry, and something I've written has empowered her to either come forward or speak more publicly than she would have. And that did just happen this week, even though I haven't necessarily written about the Boulevard thing. I've been sharing stuff on social, and I've had some people come forward privately to me and be like, your article that you wrote 3 years ago about discrimination encouraged me to report it to my boss, kind of thing. And I don't think there's anything that's more important to me than that.
No, I love it, because that's not why you signed up for the job, but it's nice to hear that you made a difference in someone's life.
Huge. I mean, like we talked about, that people who come forward risk their whole careers, it's scary. It's really, really, really scary. So anything that anybody can do, like you having your panel, I bet a lot of people after that are going to report things that they've been holding on to.
I mean, I hope it does have a positive impact like that. I hope it truly makes a difference, because there's a lot of great people in the DEI space, and people willing to step up about sexual harassment, and they're putting themselves out there. But at the end of the day, they're helping make craft beer and the world a better place. I mean, such a broad statement to make, but people who are willing to share their stories truly make a difference.
Oh, 100%. And a lot of people, and I'm looking at the time because I want to find a way for us to end on a positive note. So I'll just say this quickly.
I got you covered in a moment.
Cool, good. I knew you would be. What happens to women who face discrimination and related problems in the industry when they go unheard, they leave the industry. I mean, I'm even just hearing the past year or two how often that happens. I didn't realize how big a problem that was.
Yeah, we can just hope the company cultures start getting more positive and inclusive and equitable for everybody. I mean, yeah, it's a somber note, but we need to see the changes.
I'm hopeful, and I'm looking forward to it.
No, I believe in what we have here. I believe the industry wants to be better, and the good is going to rise up. But now we'll leave on a more positive note, Tara, because you immerse yourself in so much travel, food, alcohol. So we're going to do a lightning round really quick. First question, favorite place you've ever traveled?
Ah, that's right. We didn't even talk about Forbes and travel.
I know. It's okay. It's okay. Like if you could hop on a plane right now, where are you going?
I can't say favorite place I've ever traveled. There are too many. They're too different. When you just asked me that, what popped into my mind was this remote island in the South China Sea. It's the southernmost part of China. I was in this resort that, like, words fail me. I can't describe it. The people who worked there took pictures of me because they'd never met an American before. It was insane. We were on the beach. I learned how to play beach polo with like this international polo star. So hot. Anyway, I'm sorry. What's the next question?
Favorite food? You know, when someone's making you that last dish you have to have, what is that favorite food? Because I know you appreciate quality meals.
I do. I love Ethiopian food. That's going to be my go-to kind of restaurant. I am an Annapolis girl, so I have to give props to blue crabs, and I do love lobster. So my last meal is some sort of like smorgasbord of crabs, lobster, and Ethiopian food. It sounds kind of gross.
You're making me hungry right now. Okay, next up, favorite non-alcoholic beverage. And I'm not talking like NA beers. I'm just talking drink that doesn't have alcohol in it.
Bloody Mary mix.
Ooh, just by itself?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, now on to alcohol. I don't care what segment you're going. Favorite alcoholic beverage that you will have in your glass tonight?
I'm very equal opportunity. Obviously, I have a serious soft spot for beer, but when it comes to actual drinking, I like it all. I'm going to go with my favorite beer style, which is Mexican stout.
That's one of my favorite styles as well. And because you kind of gave the Forrest Gump reference earlier, I'm going to throw you one final question. You mentioned that you kind of drank with the decades. Is the 2020s going to be seltzer for you?
I have a marketing client who makes seltzer.
So yes, it is going to be.
You know, I don't hate I don't hate seltzer itself, and I don't hate the idea of seltzer. I gotta say, sometimes I feel like drinking something kind of lightly alcoholic. I don't feel like a beer, and I will surprise myself. And when I find that there's some seltzer in my fridge, because I get a lot of random things sent to me, I've been very happy to drink 2 or 3 of them.
There you go. Yeah. I love it. So this has been fun. It's been nice learning a little bit more about you and just having a friendly conversation. I think a lot of other people really enjoy kind of learning more as well. I really can't wait till we can actually share a beer in person, whatever that may be, wherever that may be. But I have hope that it's going to happen hopefully within the next year, if not sooner. So I'm looking forward to that. And thanks for hanging out with me today, Tara. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
In person, virtually. I'll see you later. No, it's always fun to chat. Talk to you soon. See ya.